Right, inviting everybody for a prayer before we start. In the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for your providence, your love, your guidance, and all things that allows us to work and function in this world. May our existence be lived with purpose as we continue to live our lives all for your greater glory. This we pray through Christ our Lord. Amen. Saint John Baptist de La Salle, pray for us. Leave Jesus in our hearts forever. In the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. Amen. All right. So again, let me proceed with the ones that we were discussing earlier. We were jumping into what we call this, the very concept of here, your alternative obligations. Okay. So again, the very rundown lang. Be able to familiarize yourselves in understanding what is a compound obligation. Just a little, let's go a little back. So again, when you are distinguishing a simple obligation from a compound obligation, take note, one prestation and then the other one, two or more prestations may be available. The objective in a compound obligation is to create a simple obligation, making it the choice would then convert it as one where there can only be one prestation to become due and demandable. Now, under compound, we have conjunctive and distributive. In conjunctive, wala na tanadaya may i-argue because there are several prestations. Meaning, I oblige myself to give you a car, to give you a house, to give you money. All of them are due and demandable. Meaning to say, I have to comply with all of them. There is no choice there to be made because all must be fulfilled. Okay? That's the conjunctive part. Again, please do not confuse yourself with conjunctive and distributive. Distributive is where we find the alternative presentations of obligation. Because in here, you will be able to understand that there is a choice to be made, a selection to be done. So there can be a number of prestations, but you don't need to perform all of them. You just need to secure at least one or two. I mean, two or more in order for you to be able to be compliant with the obligation. Okay. And in distributive, this is where we're learning already the distinction between a facultative and an alternative obligation. Right. Again, we're studying this because remember your pillars. Your pillars are your elements of the obligation. Ano ganing obligation? The obligation which needs to have an active subject, a passive subject, an object or prestation, and then your vinculum juris. Your vinculum juris is one wherein what binds or the legal tie or cause for the parties to be considered as accountable or to enforce one necessarily to follow the terms of the respective roles, whether he is a passive or an active subject. And then your object. So we are looking into the third element, object or prestation. So as mentioned, there can be multiple objects, multiple prestations, and this is how we're trying to identify the applications of the law in hand, right? So in an alternative obligation, please take note, several prestations which are due, but you can, when you perform just one of them, you are considered to have fulfilled already the obligation, okay? But in a facultative obligation, there's only one prestation, but there can be an option to substitute it for another depending on various cases. Right? Sige. I hope this is clear. The idea is very simple. Now, alternative. How do we simplify alternative? Several but one. Several but only one, I mean. several but only one. Meaning, there's a lot, but isa lang, okay na. In facultative, there's only one prestation, isa lang, but pwede islan. And so you ought to prefer to be what? The only choice. So simple obligation. Pero mo na da sa mga chick boy da. And damo da sa ila may mga facultative ng mga obligation. Ang iba da gusto alternative. Pero make it a simple obligation. There's only one. Okay? Now, moving on. So these are the basic understanding. Dina, oblige yourself to deliver to Carl a car. So in doing so, that's it. It's a simple obligation. What is the prestation here? An obligation to give, which is to deliver a car to Carl. Okay. Now, please take note, again, wherein various prestations are due, but the performance of one of them is sufficient as to determined by the choice, which is a general rule. Again, pinaka-importante, the choice belongs to the debtor. The choice belongs to the debtor. Okay. Now, here we have technically Dina making several prestations. Either she will deliver a car, she will give the house, or deliver a set of money. So here, the performance must be complete and the creditor cannot be compelled to receive part one or part of the other. So not pwede half of the half. Pwede half of the money, half of the rights. Meaning when you are trying to make it a simple obligation, converting a compound obligation to a simple obligation, you just need to select one. And the selection of one will be then converting it to a simple obligation. So the right of choice belongs to the debtor and it has to be expressly made if you are granting it to the creditor. Okay? So nga kisa gina-reserve sa debtor because the debtor is the one who is burdened to perform something or to give something. Therefore, the law looks into his favor and sees that as soon as what is deemed convenient for his choice, he will be able to do it. Now, if he is going to pass it to the creditor in making the choice, it is also very important that the creditor is expressly granted such right. So here, the debtor shall have no right to choose those prestations which are impossible, unlawful, or which could have been the object of the obligation. Say, for instance, in the terms that they agreed upon, it's a car, a house, or the money. The debtor cannot choose the delivery of the items that were not actually being mentioned to be given. This is the example. The car, the house, the money. And here, expressly stating the debtor cannot choose kung ano pa naka-gold, ka-silver, ka-pure, kamahalon ang iyang ging present nga toaster. Technically, the rule is that the debtor is not granted to have such right. Of course, it can be modified kay simply pa i-combine mo ang tanan nga value sang car, sang house, sang money, ang value bisang toaster niya kay amo niyang toaster ni Elvis Presley. So amo niyang pilion niya. Well, that can be arranged and modified. Meaning to say they're entering into a new form of contract or a new form of an agreement. So pwede siya. But in the general rule, again, the debtor cannot choose those obligations which are not being presented. Now, here we have with us an understanding that impossible, unlawful, or which could not have been the object of the obligation, the only one is practicable, will become the more suited choice. Okay? Same. I hope that's clear. And hindi galing yapon pwede ang toaster. What if nakaw ang salakyan? It is unlawful object already. What if ang ihatag niya nga balay is ang balay, ang iyang structure is made from the sands of Mars. So bawal. So impossible to do that. Now, the choice shall produce no effect except from the time, as we mentioned, it has been communicated, meaning cognitive. The choice will be then final if it was received by the creditor or the one who is supposed to receive that communication. So the debtor will have then lose the right of choice. Kung, for instance, he is only now practically have only one choice to be made. Okay, so the debtor chooses the right of choice when among the prestations he is alternately bound, only one is now practicable, meaning only one can be performed. Instances, the car is the choice. The second choice is the giving of the house or the delivery of money. Now, the effect of choice, once the choice is made, it becomes now a simple obligation. It becomes irrevocable and cannot be changed by either the party without the consent of the other. Usually sa mga contracts that are being entered into, in instances nga there can be modification, changes for the prestations must be with the consent of the other party. Proof and form of notice is on the burden of the person who is making the choice. 1203, if through the Creditors Act, the debtor cannot make a choice according to the terms of the obligation, the latter may rescind or cancel the contract. He may rescind or cancel the contract. So say for instance, if through the Creditors Act, ginghulam sang creditor ang salakyan, gingbunggo niya, or in some ways, he has affected to deteriorate the value of that first choice, then the debtor is given the right to actually cancel the contract if he needs to. So Dina is given the option to return the amount plus the interest, and Dina can demand from Carl the value of the plus the damages. And either Dina can also choose the other items which the value of them is still there, but plus the damages. So choose other items and the value of the loss. So idugang niya pagid ang value sang first choice nga nadula. All right. So the creditor shall have the right to indemnify or indemnity for damages when through the fault of the debtor. Please take note ha, basta may fault gani, may sala, you can ask for damages. All the things which are alternatively the object of the obligation has been lost or the compliance of the obligation has become impossible. Basta ang effect the cause is there is fault on the part of the debtor. There is fault. And the effect is that the item, which is the object, has been lost or its compliance has become impossible. The creditor is given the right to claim for damages. Basta you look into the facts and see, is there fault there? Kay sino ang fault? And then, kay sino na impair ang right of choice, that one who has been aggrieved by it can always ask for the damage. So indemnity shall be fixed based on what? The value of the last thing which has disappeared or that of the service which has become impossible. So damages other than the value of the last thing may also be awarded. Munang pamangkot sang una, attorney, kung tanan binadula, ano ang natabo? Nagsabat na yon ng isa ko ka-student. Way kagid lagabasa, hambal sang 1204, ang last nga item nga nadula, amo na ang value sang dapat nga i-fix. Well, the problem is actually, he is both correct and wrong. You need to identify, again, whether the object is a specific object or a generic object. Okay? Because you need to look into the selection, what if the object is money? And money is a generic thing. Nadula ang money. he has the obligation to continue paying because the loss of his money is actually a generic item. And the principle is that genus non quam perit, or a generic thing never perishes, means that the obligation will continue and be subsisting. So remember and be careful with that. Right? So this is the example, effect of loss of objects of the obligation. So the right of choice, again, belongs to the debtor. Then we have with us the right of choice, which belongs to the creditor. Belongs to the creditor. Creditor ni siya na dula lang ang C. Na dula lang ang cre. So, some of the object is lost. The right of choice is belonging to the debtor. This is the scenario. So, if it is at the debtor's fault, and the debtor is the one who has the choice, not liable if there is what we call fortuitous event. Okay? Loss is made not because of fault, but because of fortuitous event, then the debtor will have no liability, assuming that the objects, again, are specific. So the creditor has no right to indemnity. So, siguro, fortify your mind with this fact. Kung may fault, maka-ask damage. Kung wala fault, nadula ang item, or the object was actually lost or damaged, take note what kind of object was lost. Okay? Attorney, what if may fault na siya, specific pa ang object? Or may fault siya, kag generic ang object? What will happen? The presence of fault will automatically be a factor to allow the claim for damages. All right? The presence of fault. Now, you would only look into the idea whether it is specific or generic if the loss is not caused by fault. Okay? Look into that because nadula siya tuod, but it is a generic thing. So kung nadula siya nga wala fault, then all you need to do is simply comply with it because it's a generic thing. I hope it's clear to you, when you're looking into the object, make sure that you know the nature of the object. The nature of the object can be, say for instance, in an obligation to give. Yung ihatag mo is a specific thing, meaning its uniqueness, particularity is so distinguishable from the rest that its loss can never be replaced. But in a generic thing, when you lose it, you can always find the same standard or quality to replace it. So ara na siya. That becomes now the very idea of how you will be then reacting to the consequence of loss. Now, it is the debtor that chooses here. So this is just simply reinstating that when the loss is not through the debtor's fault, the creditor has no right to indemnity, assuming again that the object here is a specific thing. It is the debtor that chooses in this scenario. Now, what if all? Yes, Carl.
Attorney, out of curiosity, attorney, what if attorney, if an item is a generic thing, however, it has sentimental value, which, for example, your father has given it to you, tapos nadula by attorney, sang on the other side of the contract. Although it's a generic thing, but it's somehow different in a sense because it's somewhat given by your father, quote unquote, example of attorney.
Okay.
So now, how would that be categorized?
All right. Sige. I get what you mean. When we're talking about the distinction of a generic thing to a specific thing, you need to look into the nature of the thing and the intention of the parties. Say, for instance, if what I'm going to give you is just a simple watch, but that watch is actually an heirloom watch that has actually been, kumbaga, been for the family for generations and all, and it has for itself a value, then it raises into the standard of a specific thing. A watch is generally generic. Okay? but because of a particular distinctive quality that one has a investment or kumbaga interest over it, it now becomes a specific thing. So you either take for it into the context of the intention of the parties. Say, for instance, I promise to give to you this watch, which belongs to our family. Now, the interest of the other individual is that he wants that watch because he wants to be the tagapagmana of that watch. Or the intention is, I just simply want a watch. Okay? So please take note to that because um, though a particular thing, again, is generic, when it has for in itself descriptions and for other intents and purposes a more value or characteristics in it. Nga basi bala again, the example that is being provided raises it to a level of just any ordinary thing, then it becomes a particular generic kahit ano na mo, in other civilists, they're just actually two identification of an object. Either it's a generic thing or it's a specific thing. Now, some civilists would also claim that there's a middle ground, and that is a particularly generic object. Meaning, generic siya, but it has to come from this particular class. Say, for instance, I promise to give you a cow. So, a cow is generic. But what if I promise to give you a cow from my farm, and you would claim and otherwise the cow that I want is actually from the farm of your brother, meaning it is generic, but it has to come from a standard of selection, and that should come from the origin of your brother's farm. Maybe because your brother's farm is raising Kobe beef, or mas lain siya nga quality or standard. So the generic, particular generic, or what we call as the middle part is ano niya siya? Generic. Oh yeah, the particular generic. Nga gabilong siya, may ara siya, at least classification within it. And then the last part is the specific thing. Right? So ang specific thing niya, very identifiable. Say for instance, my car, I will give you my car. And what if I would make the distinction, my car, I will give you my car. My car is actually a particular generic because it cannot be just any car. It has to be my car. So you also need to make a qualification if the car says, my car, which is plate number ABC123. That's a very specific thing. Okay? But when I claim, I'll give you something, I'll give you a car, and then later on, you found out that he has a lot of car. What now becomes happen here? Now it becomes what? A alternative type of obligation. Because you would then clearly state that there are particular different objects. And then in that particular object, you just need to select one. And in selection of one, that already is the particularity of a single obligation. Okay, so yeah, thank you for that question. Now, here, all of the choices, if all of the objects is lost and the right of choice belongs to the debtor, what is the scenario? Here, the choice to give a car, a house, or a silver toaster. It was lost through the debtor's fault. Debtor will still be held liable. Debtor will have damages, will pay damages. And if lost through a fortuitous event, what will happen? No liability. Again, the assumption is that these are all specific things. The creditor's right to indemnity is again based on 1170. Okay? 1170, whoever is guilty of fraud, negligence, or in any manner contravene the tenor of the obligation is liable for damages. So here, 1205, when the choice has been expressly given to the creditor, the obligation shall cease to be an alternative from the day when it was communicated to the debtor. Cognitive meaning the moment it is made known, or the debtor has made known, or anyone who's supposed to receive it. So until the responsibility of the debtor shall be governed by the following rules. Here, 1205 is very important in terms of what happens in that time frame nga wala paging communicate ang choice. The scenario is given to this. If one of the thing is lost through a fortuitous event, he shall perform the obligation by delivering that which the creditor should choose from among the remainder. If the thing is lost, again, through a fortuitous event. A fortuitous event is an act of God of which, although it is foreseen, it cannot be avoidable. Meaning, it was lost by reason that it is not part of your fault. Like a storm, an earthquake. These are instances of which the loss of the thing may be attributed because of that happening, but it is not due to your fault. So, what happens? The loss of such thing will again what? Will make the creditor choose pero sa mga nabili na lang, or that which remains if only one subsists. 2, if the loss of one of the things occur through the fault of the debtor. Ang scenario sa number 2 ha, nadula siya through the fault of the debtor. What is the rule? Ang creditor may claim any of those that are subsisting, meaning the remainders, the ones nga nabilin. Or may choice pagyapon ang creditor. Pwede pilion sang creditor ang nadula nga item through the fault of the the debtor and ask for damages. Okay? Ang nadula plus ang damages because of the fault of the debtor. Third scenario, what if all the things are lost through the fault of the debtor? And the choice by the creditor shall fall upon the price of any one of them plus indemnity for damages. The last one is here. Wait, I cannot see. The same rule shall be applied to obligations to do or not to do in some cases when some or all of the prestations should become impossible. So here's a scenario. And the scenario falls like this. One of the things lost through a fortuitous event, say for instance, hit by lightning, shall perform the obligation by delivering that which the creditor should choose from among the remainder. The car, the house, the boat. Notice that these items are more of a specific thing. The car got hit. The house got burned because of the lightning also. So the only choice that can be remaining is the boat. Question: should the debtor pay for damages? Answer: no, because it was a fortuitous event. Fortuitous event, out of his control, her control, si Dina na din. Out of her control, the car got hit by the lightning, and because the car was parked near the house got burned. Oh, dula. Mayo lang kay tubig, ara sa tubig ang boat. So nagsubsist. So that which remains will be now the only choice of the creditor. Can the creditor here say, Dina, I really wanted the car. Can I get the car na value and then ask for damages? Wala. Hindi pwede. Kaya hindi ko sala. Fortuitous event. Basulon mo to ang lightning. So Dina can always set that the defense because that scenario is she's protected by it. Now, another instance. What if loss is due to what? Loss of one of the things through the fault of the debtor. The creditor may claim any of those subsisting or the price. So mo na ni. Nadula ang car kay, say for instance, Dina drove it to the lake, nahulog sa lake. And then the creditor actually chooses the delivery of a house. Now, the creditor can also choose the boat. But the special option is the creditor can choose the value here, the price of that which has been lost through the fault, plus right to damages. Pwede siya ka-ask damages if ginpili niya ang house or ang boat. No, hindi pwede. Kung magpili siya sang house kag sang boat, he cannot ask for the damages because they are subsisting. There was no fault on the part of the debtor because the items are preserved and the items are existing. Now, what if loss of all the things through the fault of the debtor? The choice by the creditor shall fall upon the price of any one of them, also the indemnity for damages. Hapos lang niya nga rule. All of them got exploded because nagpalupok si Dina and then tanan na destroyed. Anong himuon? Pili sa tanan ang creditor. Carl can choose all of them plus the right to damages. Only the price of these things plus damages. Okay? Basic rule. The same rule shall be applied to obligations of what? To do or not to do, in case some or all of the prestations should become impossible. So say for instance, Dina promised to converting it, Dina promised to fix the car. Again, earlier, these are obligations to give a particular thing. If we're going to convert them to obligations to do or not to do, say for instance, Dina in her commitment to Carl said, yeah, I promise to fix your car. So it's a service. I promise to construct or allow or the construction or repair of the house. Or Dina promises that I promise to lend you or give you a tour using the boat. So these are all obligations to perform, to do. Meaning she's not gonna give it. She's just gonna render some service or perform an act. So same rule. What is the value of the thing? In particular, what should the creditor choose? Either for that, for this, or that item. Okay? When only one of the prestations has been agreed upon, but the obligor may render another in substitution, the obligation is called a facultative one. Okay? Only one prestation has been agreed upon, but there is a clause which allows the obligor to render another in substitution. It is a facultative type of obligation. Here, the rules would state that the loss or deterioration of the thing which is intended as a substitute through the negligence of the obligor does not render him liable. Meaning, ang inugbulos niya bala, ang inog-substitute niya, kung amutuya ang naguba, na deteriorate or nadula, wala iyag liability. Even if may negligence pa, it will not render him liable. Why? Kay substitute lang mo. Pero, once you have already committed that ang ihatag mo ya ang substitute, the obligor is liable for the loss of the substitute on account of what? Delay, on account of negligence, on account of fraud. So here, facultative obligation just simply means the substitution of one. So it's substitution jutsu. Okay. Now, when the idea here is when only one prestation has been agreed upon, but the obligor may render in another, this is the very idea of your facultative obligation. So Dina will give her piano to Carl, but In case ang piano will not arrive or is not viable, then she can substitute to give what? A 43-inch classic plasma TV, flat screen. Notice that there's only one prestation, and that is to deliver a piano to Carl. But there can be instances wherein, because the object here may not materialize, there can be a substitution offered. I remember when I made the quiz, a farmer offered to deliver 100 sacks of rice, grain of rice. And in so delivering, the due date for the delivery would be around the 1st of January. However, because of the typhoon and some of the, part of the reasoning is that I promised to deliver 100 grains of rice, or if it's not yet available, I promise to give 100 sacks of 50 sacks of sugar from my sugar mill. Okay? Take note that the reason oftentimes for substitution is that the object may not be available yet or does not materialize yet. So that can be one of the consideration. Why substitution is allowed. Okay? So only the piano is due, but in case of loss or in case it's not yet available through her fault, nadula ang piano. Kung nadula ang piano, anong matabo? My fault? Yes. Liable for damages. So Dina will give her piano to Carl, but she can substitute the TV instead. That's allowed because Carl agreed nga kung hindi available, pwede siya sa TV. Okay lang sa, depende sa need ni Carl. Carl the creditor. Carl the creditor doesn't really have an invested thing for the piano. He just wants that something is given to him. Okay? So effects of loss in this instance is something like this. Please take note, once the substitution is made, the obligation renders it to be a simple obligation, just like the issuance. So you look into a timeline before and after. Before, the principal thing is lost through a fortuitous event, extinguished. The loss of the thing intended as a substitute with or without the fault of the debtor, no liability. In the example I gave you, what if ang nadula is ang TV? This one. Here, the example is ang TV ang nadula. Wala kaso. Because ang primary nga object nga i-deliver is ang piano. If ang piano is still be available for delivery, maski ging sunog pa ni Dina ang flat screen nga TV, wala siya liability. Saan ulang maka-liability? Kung nag-make na choice. Okay? Kung naghimo na siya choice. Bang. So, wala problema. No liability gyapon. But if after substitution, here, if the principal thing is lost, the debtor is not liable, whatever may be the cause of the loss. Because you have already agreed niya, hindi lang guro ang piano, ihatag ko ang TV na lang. And the other party agreed. So the loss will not incur liability even if it was made through fault because it is no longer the thing that is due. The loss of the substitute, the liability of the debtor, depends upon whether or not the loss is due to his or her fault. Yes, Jackie.
Question, attorney.
Go.
What if, same example lang, ang piano and ang TV. What if the piano na-lost ang piano because of the negligence of or the fault of the debtor? But however, gina-ask ng creditor is payment of damages. Pero since ang debtor, though hindi siya bala ka-provide sa amount nga same value sang piano, gin-propose niya what if i-substitute na lang sa TV, which is a product na mismo. Pero maindi gyapon ang creditor kay gusto niya value or ang amount or money ang gusto niya i-receive.
That the choice does not belong to the creditor. Please take note of that. Should there be, actually it's in the subsequent nga provision, should the choice for substitution be available and be made by the creditor, you apply the same set of rules. Galing kay what you're asking is actually another set of prestation, and that is the value or the item. Meaning, I'll give you the piano or the value of the piano. I'll give you the TV or the value of the TV. So these are items of which considered as several objects already. Now, what I find difficult to understand is who in this set is granted the right to choose. Because if you're claiming that it is the creditor that is going to ask for its value, then it has now substituted itself to, it has now rendered itself into a simple obligation. Diba? Ang giging pangayo kuya is the money. So regardless of the loss, regardless of the item, you have already converted it into a simple obligation, which is the value of the money. Or the value of the money, the value of the thing, which is the piano or the TV. Okay? Claro, Jackie?
Yes, attorney.
All right, thank you. So your assignment actually, I'm just giving it ahead, kaya wala ko pa na-publish, is for you to create a distinction between facultative and alternative obligation as to object, as to compliance, as to the right of choice, as to the effect of fortuitous event, and as to effect of culpable loss. I'm giving this ahead so that you would have the idea. Wala ko pa siya na-publish, but this is part of the exercise that I'm going to announce to you. Right? Sige. So beforehand, wait, huh? I'm trying to give you an idea of this other thing. Yan. Share ko anay ang isa ka item. Sige, so far, medyo klaro-klaro man siya. Yeah, klaro-klaro siya kaya may illustration siya. You know what? The document that I'm sharing to you, I made this like 4 or 5 years ago pa. So these are mostly all of the items I am familiar with. Because mas comic siya eh. So mas hapos siya intindihon kay ginabato-bato. This one I also wanted to share. Primarily by reason that it actually is just like the quick obligation sketch I created. This is how ideally you can proceed with the learning. Wait, here. Is it sharing? Is it sharing? I'm not sure. It's not sharing. Wait, here. There. All right. Here. Lasing lang ah. I know it's more or less time in a while. May 15 minutes pa. So, when we were trying to classify beforehand obligations, please take note, we're gonna jump into pure and conditional obligation actually now. All the provisions there are found in Article 1179 to 1192. Pure and conditional obligations. May conditions, may ara man, pure ang klase nga obligation. You just need to identify them. Then we have obligation with a period, meaning it is made in accordance with a particular set of time or happening. or even just a manner of certainty. Okay, a period is one which necessarily would come. Then we were already discussing alternative and facultative obligation. We're closing that because that's the topic already. So nataposan na ang part of that. And then obligations with the penal clause, we'll deal with that afterwards. Tapuson lang ni Anay ang pure, conditional, and with a period. Amo ning sadya ang joint and solidary type of obligation because medyo nosebleed ta jutay on how the rules will be then discussed. It will be made in a more illustrative na manner. Hapos na niyang divisible kang indivisible type of obligation. Because again, when we were discussing it, your criteria is to identify whether one thing is susceptible for partial performance or not. Mula ginaibutang yung embed nyo. Is the intention of the party made for partial or full performance, or it's not? So, the secondary types, we had unilateral and bilateral. Real and personal obligations are discussed actually in the very onset when we were discussing natures of obligation. That's 1163 to 68. Determinate and generic as to the object, that's under 1165. The rules there will enlighten you on. Again, it states there that a generic thing never perishes, a determinate thing which is being defined. We have civil, natural types of obligations. We're jumping into that part. We have the different kinds of how obligation is being created, either because of law, because of the agreements of the party, or because of one thing wherein penalized under, again, set of law that imposes it. Okay, so let me go quickly to pure and conditional types of obligation. So a pure obligation is one which is not subject to a condition. Therefore, you need to know and ask yourself, what is a condition? A condition is future and an uncertain event. Future and uncertain event. There might be a happening of a condition. There might be no happening of the condition. But when we are talking about a pure obligation, it's not subject to a condition. There is no specific date. And its characteristic is that it is immediately demandable. So when I say, I will give you 1,000 pesos. Pure obligation. Just by the words that I saw. Again, let's identify them. I will give you 1,000 pesos. Characteristic. If this is you, then you can immediately demand, di na 1,000. Give me the 1,000. And then I said, wala pa gani, but it's a pure obligation, meaning it's immediately demandable. Then I would claim, ganta ka 1,000 next week. So it's no longer a what? A pure obligation. Why? Because you stated a specific date, next week. So what is now this kind of obligation which is more dependent on a specific date? It is an obligation with a period. There is a time frame, a term for you to claim. Right? So what about when we're talking about condition? Condition naman niya is fewer. It's not pure, but it's a future and uncertain event. Meaning the two must coincide. It is a future and uncertain event of which its happening or upon its happening either creates what? An effectivity of an obligation or it extinguishes an obligation. Example of an obligation that is with a condition. the one that I gave you earlier. I promised to give you 1,000 if you will perfect the quiz. You will have a perfect score in your quiz. So it's a future event, but having a perfect score is uncertain. Therefore, it may occur, the condition may occur. Therefore, if it occurs, there is a demandability for the 1,000. Now, what if I turn it into a future and uncertain event, but it extinguishes an obligation? Say, for instance, I will lend you my book for obligations in contract so long as you get a passing score in the quiz. The moment that you did not pass the quiz, it extinguishes my obligation to lend you my book. Do you follow? It extinguishes my obligation to lend you or give you the right to utilize the book. A condition can also be a past but unknown event. This is always my favorite thing. I will give you 1,000 if you can prove to me that the last meal of Jose Rizal before his execution was champurrado. Who among you knew what were the exact meal Jose Rizal ate before he was fired in Bagong Bayan? It's a condition, but it is qualified to be a past event, and it must be coupled with the idea that it is unknown to both of the parties. Okay? Usually, a condition arises in wagering contracts or bets. Di ba? Kung mga galantaw, kamunis ang mga betting events. Sino nagalantaw? Squid Games. Wala pa akong galantaw Squid Games. You should watch it. It's amazing. Okay. So, say for instance, betting on horse races. You choose between 1 to 10 with the condition that when you chose the item, if horse number 8 wins, you get to win a prize. You don't know who's going to win, and you're not certain if the one you selected will eventually win the race. So usually conditions are ones wherein high risk, high reward. May mga certainties of that. Okay? So, when we're talking about conditions which will take effect upon its happening, these are called suspensive conditions. Your right to demand or your right to enjoy is actually suspended. So, it's a suspensive type of condition. When we're talking about a condition which extinguishes your obligation upon its happening, that is what we call a resolutory condition. It will resolute, will absolve you already of paying or performing items. So future, uncertain, and happening of which either gives rise or doesn't. This is the word association that you need to be familiar with. So there's a condition, precedent or antecedent. The happening of the obligation will give rise, the happening of the condition will give rise to the obligation. Your right to demand is actually suspended until it has fully effected. So everything is just a mere hope or a mere expectancy until the conditions are fulfilled. Set for instance, in resolutory, a condition is subsequent and it will extinguish whatever it is that you have. Meaning to say, you can demand it right away. Just like a pure obligation, a Resolutory obligation allows you to demand the obligation right away. Say, for instance, you can use my car until you graduate from college. Meaning, if you graduate from college, you will no longer have the right to utilize the car, because that is where a condition lies. How sure are you that you can graduate, di ba? May future and uncertain pa. Let's distinguish it from the idea of a point of view here. I will give you my land. That is an example of a pure obligation. This is an obligation to give. This is the prestation. What? Give. The object is land. The active subject here is who? You or I? Sino ang active subject here? Heart if si you, thumbs up if si I. Who is the active subject? Heart, si you, I is thumbs up. Wala kang mag-aalalan, sir, pang kick out ang mga karon. Now, just for you to understand, again, the active subject, his role is what? His role is associated to demand. The passive subject is one who has the obligation to perform. I am the one who's going to give something. Therefore, I am the passive subject. Okay. By now, you should know that. Here, let's convert a pure obligation into something that is an obligation to do. I will sell to you my land. I'm not going to give it, but I'm going to sell it to you. Therefore, the act is to perform something which is to sell. Baligya. I will not sell to anyone my land. Meaning to say, you have an interest over this. So let's enter into agreement that by the time that we set our objective that I will not sell to anyone my land, meaning for a certain period, because you're interested in buying my land. My land is 1,000 square meters. You want to buy it for 1 million. But I said, I can only let go of this property if the value is 3 million. You said, I do not have 3 million. I only have 1 million. Give me time. I can produce the 3 million in a month. Therefore, we enter into a contract, meaning I promise not to sell the land to anyone until what? Wala pa. Pure anayan gali. I promise not to sell. Okay, pure obligation. Now, if I said, I promise not to sell my land within a month, that has now a obligation with a period because there is a month, date, time frame. But if it's a pure one, I will not sell my land to anyone. That is already an example of an obligation not to do. Now, I will give you my land. I will sell to you, and I will not. Now, isa-isahon ta ha. What is the prestation? To give, to do, or not to do? What about the burden? What do you mean by burden? It is a pure obligation because there is no burden. Wala condition, wala period. Pure, pure. What about performance? In performance, it is a positive obligation because I will do something and I will provide something or I will give something. It's a positive performance also to sell something. A negative performance because I will not perform something. That is the idea of performance category, either positive or negative type of performance. Let's expand it further. What is the subject matter? What is the subject matter? Attorney, confused pa kami. Wala pa kami kung anong subject matter. The subject matter is for you to identify whether it is a real or a personal type of obligation. Here, I will give you something. Is it Personal or real? Siyempre, nakita nyo na, it's real. I will sell to you my land. I'm not gonna give you it. I'm going to perform something. I'm going to do something. And that is a personal act. Oh, wait. Let's finish. Isa lang. So subject matter, the object is specific because it is my land. And then the person obliged is unilateral because ako lang ang mag-give. Wala kaya may hatag sa akin. So next set of example, I will sell to you my land. Give me 4 minutes. Tapos ko lang ha. I know we're exceeding already. This is a personal type of subject matter. The object involved, it's specific because it is still my land. And it has now become what? What do you mean by unilateral? Ako lang gyapon ang maobra. Wala kaya obrahon. Wala kaya duty. Still personal, still specific, and still unilateral. Let's expand to the understanding. Pure effectivity or extinguishment is not dependent upon condition or a period. A condition, future and uncertain. A period, it is a certain length of time which determines effectivity or the extinguishment of an obligation. So, say for instance, I'll give you 1,030 days from now. Is it pure, conditional, or with a period? Sige. Heart, kung pure, pamatianay.
The period, attorney.
Pamatianay. I will give you 1,030 days from now. Kung pure, heart. Kung conditional, thumbs up. Kung period, laugh emoji. Sige, go. That. Sige. Okay. Because there is a certain length of time, then that is one where a period is needed. Okay? Say for instance, I will give you my car when I die. Pure, conditional, or with a period. So again, if it's pure, heart, conditional, thumbs up, period, laughing emoji. Iba niya. Wala na. Sige. Alright. Here is something that you should learn before we end. Death is a period. It is not a condition. When you are speaking about a certainty, we are all certain to die. Morbid as it may sound, death is not a condition. So I will give you the car if I die. But if you made some clarifications or characteristics about the cause of your death, that becomes a condition. Say for instance, I promise, Pedro promises Juan to give his car if he dies of tuberculosis. Napataya si Pedro pero na-hit and run siya. Conditional. Okay? So please take note of that. Right? We'll end here. I'll open up your workshops and work agreements maybe within this week. Huh? Okay? So with that, thank you. Okay, question. Yes, Brad.
Attorney, I would like to ask again, attorney, for the copy of the PowerPoint, attorney. Thank you.
I'll post it in general, all of them. Right? Leave Jesus in our hearts.
Forever.
Thank you.
Thank you, attorney.
You can go.
Thank you, attorney.
Thank you, attorney.
Bye.
Bye, attorney. Bye-bye. Thank you again. God bless.